Thank you to all the friends who are here today to reflect with us at the beginning of this month of our theme of resistance. I am Reverend Michelle Scott-Huffman. My pronouns are she, her. I am a middle-aged woman with a short, spiky haircut, my characteristic plaid shirt, which today is green and blue, to go with blue pants. And just glad to be here with you today. I'm the minister here at First UU. A couple of weeks ago, I spent the week of Missouri State's spring break on a racial justice pilgrimage with some campus ministry colleagues. The trip was a beta test for the itinerary and curriculum that is meant to build awareness of our shared history of heinous racialized violence and to invite participants into truth-telling and reflection on what is necessary for reconciliation, restoration, and even reparation. In a time that so many are bent on erasing the horrors of our deadly, destructive, and dehumanizing past, I can't think of a more important journey for our students, and quite frankly, for most of our adults as well, to take and to take in. I'm not going to recap today all of the trip and its learnings, but I would like to share the sequence of experiences and a few reflections as the context of my message today on nonviolent resistance. Our journey together started in Selma, where we took the Footprints to Freedom tour, which includes tours of the National Voting Rights Museum, the Slavery and Civil War Museum, a visit to the historic Brown Chapel AME Church, where strategy sessions and nonviolence trainings were held, and a walk across the historic Edmund Pettus Bridge, a bridge named after Confederate Brigadier General, U.S. Senator, and Grand Dragon of the Alabama Ku Klux Klan. The Edmund Pettus Bridge was the site of the conflict of Bloody Sunday on March 7th, 1965, when police attacked civil rights movement demonstrators with horses, billy clubs, and tear gas as they were attempting to march to the state capitol. The city of Selma is still recovering after tornadoes ripped through the city in January of this year. And some hope that the community working together through this natural disaster might somehow finally help residents break through lines of race, class, gender, and more. But tornado aside, just being in Selma makes it clear that there has not been any significant economic investment in this community to facilitate healing and thriving after the atrocities that happened there. It's clear also that divisions based on race and class have continued to be upheld by economic and social policies. Also clear was that there are still very different viewpoints regarding the state of racial equity in the US and in the South. For example, when I arrived at the retreat center where we would be staying for our pilgrimage, I was the first one to arrive by several hours. An awkward conversation with the caretaker of the property and the only other human being within a 10-mile radius. I responded to the question about what I was doing there with some information about our upcoming racial justice pilgrimage, where we would be visiting historic civil rights sites in Selma, Birmingham, and Montgomery. With a quiet chuckle and a shake of his head, this man, who happened to be white, informed me that people are always talking about places like Alabama and how bad racial discrimination is, but in reality, they, Alabamans, I guess, had figured all of that stuff out a long time ago, and it's all good. Unfortunately, I didn't hear much that backed up his assessment from any of our tour guides or conversation partners who were people of color. The day after we visited Selma, we were in Birmingham, where we visited the 16th Street Baptist Church, where a bomb planted by Klan members ended the lives of 4 little girls: Addie Mae Collins, age 14, Cynthia Wesley, age 14, Carol Robertson, age 14, and Carol Denise McNair, age 11. Also lost forever to race-based violence on that day were two young men, Johnny Robinson, age 16, and Virgil Ware, age 13. The first by state police, and the second by a 16-year-old on his way home from an anti-integration rally. Across from the church, which was a central location in Birmingham for meetings and nonviolence training, is Kelly Ingram Park, the site where thousands of Black residents, many of them children, protested segregation and racial violence. In this park are statues and sculptures commemorating such horrors as fire hoses turned on children and police dog attacks on peaceful protesters. Haunting images that I think we've all seen in print or on a screen at some point in our lives. Now, I have long been a student of something that I've come to call a theology of place, paying close attention to the ways that all places have historical and spiritual importance to somebody, and paying particular attention to the sacred quality of a space because of what happened there, because of who found their courage and strength there, who cultivated the land, who resisted and put their bodies on the line to fight what was, to realize a vision of what might be. On this trip for me, Kelly Ingram Park was a holy ground. It is sacred space that holds the stories of thousands of school children who showed up day after day between May 2nd and May 10th, 1963, as a part of the child-centered movement that saw thousands of them as young as 6 years old arrested in an effort that did what nonviolent resistance is meant to do: disrupt systems and defeat injustice. Not fully, obviously, but to some small extent. Also held in that park are stories of the firefighters who resisted the orders of their superiors to turn fire hoses on children a second time. When the firefighters informed their superiors that they were unable to use the hoses because they had failed to pressurize them. The guide who walked with us around the park that day sharing the stories held there, had been a 7-year-old child when he took part in the movement in 1963. And he shared his own memories of his participation. Most notably to him was that no child or adult was permitted to join the protests until they had completed the nonviolent resistance training. This was a theme repeated by every person we talked to who had been a part of the movement in those days. Nonviolent resistance was a non-negotiable foundation of the movement. There was still more learning and witnessing to do, so the next day we would visit Montgomery, the state capitol, the place where those marchers from Selma were headed on Bloody Sunday, where they didn't make it across Edmund Pettus Bridge, but where they did make it 2 weeks later, protected by U.S. Army troops and Alabama National Guard forces under the direction of President Lyndon B. Johnson, ordered under federal control. Here we would visit the Civil Rights Memorial, the Freedom Riders Museum, the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, which chronicles the devastating history of lynching in America, county by county. And finally, the Legacy Museum, which powerfully tells the story of how the institution of slavery was revitalized in the mass incarceration of people of color in the 20th century. The Legacy Museum website notes that along with the critically acclaimed National Memorial for Peace and Justice, the museum presents a unique opportunity for visitors to reckon with the challenging aspects of our past. It also serves as a catalyst for what Equal Justice Initiative calls the work to advance truth and reconciliation around race in America and to more honestly confront the legacy of slavery, lynching, and segregation. Much of that truth and reconciliation requires our participation in the movements of today that demand that all people in the land have equal opportunity to survive and to thrive. These are the movements that unfortunately are still necessary, and perhaps now more than ever, when well done, are intersectional, recognizing the truth of Fannie Lou Hamer's statement that nobody's free until everybody's free. It is a truly beautiful thing to see people honor that intersectionality by showing up and simply asking, how can I help? And I can't stress enough how much the first step really is just showing up. On Friday, I got the privilege to hug Francie Wolf on her 80th birthday because she was at the Transgender Day of Visibility event. Many of you know Francie, who is a beautiful soul and a wonderful storyteller, sharing stories of her Jewish family's escape from Nazi Germany. She's committed to education and to never remaining silent because her father taught that the reason those atrocities could happen is that good people remained silent. On Friday, Francie was introducing people to her son, who had shown up unexpectedly in town to surprise her on her 80th birthday, and who was along for the ride to the Transgender Day of Visibility event because after she shared her excitement that he had surprised her for her birthday, she was very clear that they would be attending this important event. There is a great deal of rhetoric right now in our political and social discourse that requires our resistance. In many of those spaces of resistance, we'll hear quotes from historic resistors like Martin Luther King Jr., who famously said that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. But if we are to invoke MLK's words, mustn't we also invoke his tactics? And by this, I mean the principles of nonviolent resistance. Of course, we know that nonviolent resistance wasn't new with MLK. It's documented as early as 470 before the Common Era, with the Mohist people of China who disapproved of war and cultivated the science of fortification. Today, I invoke Martin Luther King Jr. in reference to nonviolent resistance because he may be the most quoted person whose true purpose, strategy, and teachings go ignored and unpracticed. Okay, so MLK and Jesus of Nazareth, who gets his mention next week because it's Easter. So let's talk for a moment about what those principles are. According to the Martin Luther King Jr. Center for Nonviolent Social Change, there are 6 principles of nonviolence. Here they are. Nonviolence is a way of life for courageous people. It is active, nonviolent resistance to evil. Secondly, nonviolence seeks to win friendship and understanding. The end result of nonviolence is redemption and reconciliation. Third, nonviolence seeks to defeat injustice, not people. Nonviolence recognizes that evildoers are also victims. 4, nonviolence holds that suffering can educate and transform. Nonviolence willingly accepts the consequences of its acts. 5, nonviolence chooses love instead of hate. Nonviolence resists violence to the spirit as well as the body. Nonviolence love is active, not passive. Nonviolence love does not sink to the level of the hater. Love restores community and resists injustice. Nonviolence recognizes the fact that all life is interrelated. Number 6, nonviolence believes that the universe is on the side of justice. The nonviolent resistor has deep faith that justice will eventually win. In those principles, I find parallels to the first and second and sixth and 7th Unitarian Universalist principles. The inherent worth and dignity of every person, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all, and respect for the interdependent web of existence of which we are all a part. It is not surprising that we would find these parallels, especially since King credits his understanding of the principles of nonviolent resistance to Mahatma Gandhi, who in turn was said to be influenced by the writings of Henry David Thoreau, hailed as something as a Unitarian saint, if there were such a thing, even though he renounced the institutional church of his upbringing as an adult. Thoreau wrote in Civil Disobedience, "Under a government which imprisons unjustly, the true place for a just man is also a prison." Words for which I'm thankful, as I'm sure they are the original source of the sentiment in UU ministerial contracts in general, and mine in particular, with this congregation, which asserts that upon being charged with a felony, my employment may be terminated unless the charge is civil disobedience. Given the current state of political discourse and legislation in this country and in the state of Missouri, I suspect there will be a time when this particular part of my contract will need to be honored. I hope that when that time comes that some of you will be standing beside me at whatever event or protest gets me arrested. It's important to note that civil disobedience and nonviolent resistance are not the same thing, but that civil disobedience is a tactic that is a part of a larger framework that makes up nonviolent resistance. There are lots of ways to engage in nonviolent resistance that don't land you in jail. So how do we get ourselves into nonviolent resistance mode? There's a document, it looks like this, entitled 64 Ways to Practice Nonviolence. I have left copies of it on the table over there, and I believe a link will show up in the Zoom chat box as well. Why 64 ways, you ask? The 64 days between the assassination anniversaries of Mahatma Gandhi, January 30th, and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., April 4th, were designated as the Season for Nonviolence in Los Angeles in 1998. Each of the 64 days was linked to a way to practice active nonviolence. Since then, the Season for Nonviolence has grown into an international grassroots campaign dedicated to demonstrating that nonviolence is a powerful way to heal, transform, and empower our lives and our communities. There are many more than 64 ways to practice nonviolence, but the designated season gives time to focus on decreasing violence in our lives and our communities by learning to practice nonviolence. It is now celebrated in over 100 cities, including the Manhattan K-State community. We learn to practice nonviolence one step at a time, one choice at a time, one day at a time. Through our daily nonviolent choices and actions, the noble and courageous spirit within each of us expresses itself as the skills, wisdom, and character of a nonviolent human being. This is how we each, in our own way, move the world in a direction of peace. The 64 ways include things like smiling, healing, gratitude, courage, and mindfulness. And in two different places, it references breathing. Once in the description of contemplation, where it says, for at least 3 minutes, relax, breathe, and let your mind be fed by whatsoever is good and beautiful. And once in the description of mastery, where the description says, labor organizer Cesar Chavez teaches, if you use violence, you have to sell part of yourself for that violence. Then you are no longer the master of your own struggle. Breathe deeply, silently counting backwards from 10 to calm yourself and cool off before you speak or act with impatience or anger. Now this month, as we embark on this conversation of resistance, the youth religious education materials that go along with our Soul Matters theme begin with these words. The theme of the month is resistance. In this session, we'll explore the Buddhist idea that breathing is a form of resistance by using it to focus and center, instead of becoming scattered and captive of the monkey mind. Buddhism is a power example of this with its emphasis on meditation. In honor of all that we learn from Buddhism, I'll wrap up this message with this simple meditation from Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh, which may help all of us to breathe, resist, and repeat. It goes like this. Breathing in, I calm my body and mind. Breathing out, I smile. Dwelling in the present moment, I know this is the only moment. So I invite you to practice with me. Breathing in, I calm my body and mind. Breathing out, I smile. Dwelling in the present moment, I know this is a wonderful moment. Breathing in, I calm my body and mind. Breathing out, I smile. Dwelling in the present moment, I know this is the only moment. May it be so. Blessed be, and amen.